welcome. I'm Duke Redbird. I'm an artist and a poet. I'm a father, a grandfather, and a great-grandfather, and an elder from the Saugeen Ojibwe First Nation. I have white hair. I have a long ponytail. I have a very happy smile on my face right now in having this opportunity to greet and welcome everyone here. It's a real honor and a privilege to bring greetings tonight on behalf of the Indigenous peoples of Canada and to open the discussion and the Museum event. It is our custom in the Indigenous community to begin every significant gathering or celebration by first acknowledging our home and our host, our mother, the earth. It's an opportunity to remind us of our covenant with nature and all living things. We are the servants and stewards of the land, and each generation borrows its use for a brief time from their children, grandchildren, and progeny forever into infinity. In keeping with this time-honored tradition, I would like to offer a poem and a blessing that I wrote honoring not only the land, but also the water and all of the creatures, human and other, that are sustained by our mother, the earth. A great mystery created the universe and fashioned a blue geosphere, a radiant planet, the incredible earth, the mother who gave us birth, the genesis of all that we hold dear. With all the billions of stars in space, only Mother Earth could create the perfect human birthing place. A little sphere of cosmic dust was the spark of spirit given us. In all the years of her existence, she has provided for our subsistence with benevolence and generosity. She never needed our assistance. But now the world is in distress due to unrestrained excess. Nature reveals that true progress is possessed by every plant and tree that echoes every breath we breathe in a symbiotic symmetry of connected sustainability. In the present tsunami of climate change, the earth may never be the same. With 8 billion people and mouths to feed, the fires are burning, there's less air to breathe. We must preserve and conserve our rivers, savannas, and forestry to ensure our own continuity. It is time to activate, contemplate, restore, and regenerate the vitality and abundance of our birthplace. We did not choose where we are born. We are the outcome of a cosmic storm. Our journey is to search and find the natural order of the divine. Joy and enlightenment is the gift that this wisdom will bring. Cherish and adore all living things and acknowledge the cradle of our precious birth and our sacred relationship with our mother, the earth. Miigwech. I'm going to turn you over now to Nadine of Museum of Toronto.
Thank you. I would just like to start by thanking Elder Redbird. It's such an honor to be working with you and sharing this space with you tonight. Thank you as well to our audience for also being here with us. My name is Nadine Villasin-Feldman. I'm the Director of Programming at Museum of Toronto. I am a Filipino woman with dark black hair that's in a short bob, and I'm wearing a black short-sleeved top. I'm sitting on my green couch surrounded by cushions. I'd like to welcome you to our program this evening in conversation with Duke Redbird and Tanya Senk. This program will be exploring education from Indigenous perspectives, including the role of the arts, and comparing decolonizing work to centering Indigenous ways of knowing and being. Tonight's event is part of our Wigwam Cheechumong program in partnership with Elder Duke Redbird. And for those of you who have not already had the pleasure of experiencing Wigwam Cheechumong, which roughly translates to Big House Canoe in Ojibwe, is a floating art installation and Indigenous learning center docked at the Ontario Place South Marina. So if you haven't already been, please don't miss the opportunity to visit the installation between now and the beginning of October. You're also welcome to learn more about Wigwam Cheechumong on our website and/or through calling the Wigwam Cheechumong phone line, where you can learn more about Toronto's Indigenous history, culture, and connection to the waterfront through the words of Elder Redbird. Before we begin, I'd just like to share some additional information on tonight's program. This program is an hour and a half long, so please feel free to take breaks as you need them. A recording of this event will be available on our website a few weeks following the program. This is a live conversation between Elder Duke Redbird and Tanya Senk, moderated by Carrie Potts. The moderated discussion will be approximately 1 hour, followed by a 20-minute question and answer period at the end. Finally, I'd like to provide a content warning that the dialogue this evening may address subjects related to residential schools, the 60s scoop, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, forced sterilization, police brutality, and other issues caused by the ongoing impacts of colonialism. We recognize that the impact of this conversation may have on people's mental health, and we ask that everyone practice self-care as necessary during today's event. We'll be sharing some resources in the chat that may assist with this. So thank you again for joining us, and I will now pass things along to our moderator for the evening, Carrie Potts.
Miigwech, Nadine, and to everyone at Museum for being such a wonderful team. I'm really deeply honored to be here this evening, to be moderating a conversation with two absolutely inspiring people. And I'm sure each of you listening and watching tonight are just going to absorb so much from these two individuals, Duke Redbird and Tanya Senk. I will start by saying that I'm sitting in my partner's office. I have long brown hair tied back in a ponytail tonight. I'm wearing some earrings that I really love, that are beaded earrings that I picked up in the East Coast by a Mi'kmaq and Acadian women who made them, and I'm wearing a black shirt. And I'm speaking to you from the unceded Algonquin territory in Ottawa right now. And I myself am Temiagama Anishinaabe with British and Scottish heritage. And I grew up in Ottawa here, and I've been working at Humber College for many, many years now. And I did a talk recently with Duke there, and that luckily led me to talking with him again this evening. I'm a daughter, I'm a partner, I'm a parental figure to an amazing 4-year-old, I'm an auntie, and I'm absolutely amazed to be here tonight. So miigwech, and I hope we have lots of fun. I will now introduce our two incredible guests tonight. I'll start with Elder and Dr. Duke Redbird. Duke Redbird is an established Indigenous intellectual, poet, painter, broadcaster. Many of you will remember him from his time at City TV. Filmmaker and keynote speaker. He brings his breadth of cultural knowledge and artistic practice to the benefit of a global audience. And I'll also add his depth just as a human being, his kindness and his charisma as well. He works as a multifaceted artist, practicing across a number of disciplines, including literature, painting, theater, cinema, and most recently rap poetry. A well-known Canadian broadcaster and television personality, he is in demand as a keynote speaker in corporate, industry, and educational settings. As a poet, essayist, and screenwriter, Dr. Redbird has published and performed poetry readings, theatrical productions, video and film, both locally and internationally. Honestly, what hasn't Duke Redbird done? In 2020, the album Refuge was released by the band Sultans of String and features a musical version of Elder Redbird's poem, The Power of the Land. Earlier this year, Elder Redbird also published Duke Redbird Poetry. Since 2014, Dr. Redbird has been the Indigenous Arts Consultant for the Toronto District School Board and is the Artist in Residence at the Urban Indigenous Education Centre that we'll talk a little bit more about this evening. Welcome, Duke.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for those kind words of introduction. It warms my heart, and it's great to see you again. And I remember the last time we were together and the great conversations that we had, and it's really a delight for me tonight to be representing Museum of Toronto through the Wigwam Chi Chumung that is located at Ontario Place, and has been a great opportunity for me to engage with the public as they come through on Ontario Place, and I have a program that we've worked with Museum over the last actually since 2019 called Ask an Elder, and it gives people an opportunity to either visit me on the boat or phone in, and any question is welcome. As we go forward tonight, it's the same idea. Any question from the audience is very welcome. If they can be answered, do my best, and if they can't, I'll simply say I don't know, which is a favorite expression in the Indigenous community. So thank you for that introduction.
Miigwech, I was going to ask, also expect to add first Indigenous man in space sometime soon there, Duke. So he's quite an impressive character. I would like to take the moment to introduce Tanya Senk as well, who is an incredible human being and an incredible leader in our community. I know she resists that title in different ways, but Tanya is Métis Cree Saulteaux educator, speaker, and community leader. She was recently appointed as the first Indigenous Systems Superintendent of Indigenous Education in the Toronto District School Board that happens to be the largest board in Canada. So no small feat whatsoever. She's currently the superintendent of Kapapamachakwao, the Wandering Spirit School, which is an Indigenous-focused K-12 school in Toronto, partially founded by Elder Pauline Shirt, and she serves as principal there. She has been the centrally assigned principal of the Urban Indigenous Education Center of Excellence. Prior to this, she was seconded as a course director at York University in the Faculty of Education in both the Urban Diversity and Regent Park Teacher Education Program sites, where she was also an adjunct professor and an ABQ developer and instructor. Prior to this, Tanya has been an instructional leader, program coordinator, and curriculum developer in Indigenous education. She has written and reviewed with publishers such as Pearson, Good Minds, Nelson, Emmon Montgomery, ETFO, and Pembroke. As a PhD candidate, Tanya's research interests include urban Indigenous education, decolonizing education, Indigenous knowledges in innovative practices, and professional learners. So we have another low achiever with us tonight. I want to welcome Tanya Senk and say miigwech Tanya for joining us this evening.
Miigwech, tanshe, kiskia tamu in the square. My name is Tanya Senk, and I'm Métis, Cree, and Soto, and I just want to say miigwech to Elder Dr. Duke Redbird for that wonderful opening and that beautiful poem to set the context for the conversations that we'll be having this evening. And also thank you to all of the participants here and to MyZM for inviting us. And I'm extremely honored to be invited to have a conversation here with Elder Duke Redbird, who I really admire and am inspired by every day, and that I have the opportunity to be able to continue the conversations and to learn from Duke and the elders that we work with. So, Chimiigwech. I'm in my 50s. Yes, I dare to say that. I'm in my 50s. I'm wearing glasses, and I have long gray hair in a ponytail too. So there's lots of ponytails going around here, and I'm sitting in my my office at home.
Mm-hmm. Duke, would you like to take a moment to describe your setting for those viewers listening to the program?
Well, I'm in my my living room office, which I've been using for the past year to do Zoom broadcast. I have quite a collection, library of books, and on one wall, and I have my collection of Indigenous articles that I use in my smudge bowl, my medicines, cedars, sweetgrass, the sage and tobacco, and I have a gift of a headdress bonnet that was gifted to me. I don't wear it because I'm not a chief. I'm an elder, but I do have it on my desk. I have other items that have been gifted, and on the one wall, I have a beautiful button blanket from the West Coast, which keeps me connected to the West Coast. And I have baskets from the East Coast, from the Mi'kmaq basket makers, who are famous for their wonderful baskets. And I have some other pieces. So I feel very comfortable in my office, and I always have a great blue crane that I painted with symbols on there of the frog, the butterfly, and the fish on the crane, which represents the food chain of life, where the frog eats the butterfly, and then the fish eats the frog, and then the crane or blue heron eats the fish. But the spirits of all those creatures live within one another as part of the process of living and life that nature has given us. particularly when we think about what nature and Mother Earth requires of us, is to be born. And for those of us who choose to reproduce and eventually to be birthed into eternity and back to our Mother, the Earth. And it's a circle, it's a cycle, it's a beautiful thing to contemplate. And we are, every one of us, so fortunate to have had this opportunity, because the odds of any one person ever being given the gift of life and to experience this earth of ours and the experiences we have are astronomical. It's beyond imagination. There isn't an algorithm capable of calculating the odds of any one human being ever being born at all, let alone the fact that we are here tonight, having this opportunity to engage with one another. And it's something that I always try to keep in mind whenever I'm have the opportunity to get up and enjoy a sunrise every morning.
Miigwech, Duke. I really love the poem that you shared with us today. And I do want to center our conversation today about how art and education connect. And I know each of you have had a really long and interesting layered pathway through the arts, as well as educators in Toronto and beyond. And I'm wondering if we can start with Duke, and then I'll move on to Tanya to talk about her experience as well. But maybe you'd like to speak a little bit about your own road to using art as a medium to teach. And I know with Wigwam Chichimong, that is, you're literally doing that. You're actually doing that right now with the floating art gallery and, teaching space that is.
Well, when we think about what gets every human being on Earth up in the morning, what are the motivating factors? What motivates human beings? And we can reduce it down to 4 basic motivations, which is either one or a combination of 4 things. And that's all there is to get us up in the morning, to motivate us to get out of bed. And that's money, power, self-preservation, which is having a roof over our head and food on the table, and romance that is identified and expressed through family and through the arts. Now, before settlers arrived in the Americas, we did not have institutions of power. We didn't create them. We didn't have political parties or parliaments or kings or castles or churches or temples, or we had no reason to get up in the morning to acquire power, and we didn't have money. So there was no reason to get up in the morning to make money, because we didn't have financial institutions. We didn't have banks. We weren't engaged in the kind of currency that was developed by the settler population. So what got us up in the morning? What was it that motivated us? And it was our symbiotic relationship with our Mother, the Earth, number one, and our gathering of the abundance that Mother Nature provided, so that we would have a roof over our head and food on the table, and the romance of the arts, because with every heartbeat, it told us that we were in a frequency with the earth, and we had the drum, we had the song, we had the art, we had the desire to do that. Now, when the settlers came over, they had 4 motivations. We only had the 2. The money and power was never shared with the Indigenous people. And the only real entree that Indigenous people had was by the technologies that we used in discovery of the gifts of the earth. And with the settler population, they were only here not for discovery, but more for exploitation instead of exploration. And they did not share their money and their power. So if you wanted entree into the dominant culture's world, there was only one way in, and that was through the arts. And we were welcome to bring our art and our creative and innovative talents, but we weren't welcome if we were looking to acquire the money and power that the settler population held on to without any desire to share it with us.
I find that's a really powerful statement that you make. And it kind of, I've heard this expressed in different ways from different communities as well, saying they like what we create, but they don't like us necessarily, or that they pay attention. There's art becomes, and I find this with spirituality as well, sometimes becomes an easy entry point for people to culture, which is a beautiful element of that. But we also need to be included in so many other ways. But art is an extremely powerful medium, and I love the different ways that you've used art to bring forward political messages, like in the poem that you just read, and important cultural messages, and many, many layers to your artwork. Tanya, I wanted to take some time with you as well and ask you about your journey, because I know that your movement into the field of education started in part as an art teacher, and I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about that journey as an artist, as an art teacher, and I'd like to speak a little bit about one of your film projects as well.
Thank you, Carrie. So I just want to speak a little bit about myself, as you said, and that journey, and putting myself forward that way. So I do also want to say that I'm a sister, and I'm an auntie, and I'm a cousin, and I'm a daughter. And I'm also a relation of Louis Riel. And growing up, I was very proud of that. Louis Riel said a very famous quotation about art and artists that I'll come back to. And growing up, I was born in Toronto in the early 60s. And then my mother and we moved back to her home community where I grew up on my Cocum's farm. And we went back and forth quite a bit for the first formative years of my life. And that really shaped who I am today. And the farm, it crossed the Saskatchewan and Manitoba border. And I grew up with my aunties and my uncles, and a lot of joy and a lot of laughter in the family, and a lot of storytelling, and also an appreciation for things well made. Those were all a part of my life. And it was very inspirational. And just remembering the land and the connection to the land and to the relationship to the land and the stars, the big, big sky that you see out there, and the Aurora Borealis and the Milky Way, all of that left a very, very strong impression on me. And I do come from a line of many strong Indigenous people. And You know, I'm a descendant of the Bellumers and the Desjardins and the Peltiers and the Delormes. And art really carried me through, and that sense of humor carried me through, because that was the romance that Duke is speaking to. That was the joy and that was the brilliance that I had growing up. There's experiences, of course, of residential school within my family, and the resistance to that experience was the laughter, was the joy, and an appreciation to things well made. So when I came back to Toronto and I entered into the public school system, or the school system itself, it wasn't necessarily a great experience. I didn't see myself represented. I had a lot of questions that were asked, and it was really the arts that I would delve into. And school was great up until about grade 6 or so, and then after that, not so much. And then I had some really great teachers along the way who really encouraged me, and particularly encouraged me in the arts. And my family too was very supportive. So I never had any notion to become an educator, to become a teacher. So I finished high school in grade 13 when they had grade 13, and I went to York University and I did a Bachelor of Fine Arts there, and focusing on painting, drawing, and sculpture, and some photography, and then worked in the field for a while and worked with the Adesla Hendelis Art Foundation. And so I really, really enjoyed that. There was more time to be involved in the arts community in Toronto at that time. In the early 80s was very vibrant and very, very different. But the experience was the same in university. I didn't see myself represented as well. And so when I did become an art teacher, because I went back to school and my teachable is visual arts, I had the opportunity to bring different perspectives to the classroom. And invariably, I had Indigenous students, and it was also an opportunity for the non-Indigenous students to learn through art about who we are as Indigenous people and center Indigenous ways of knowing and being. And I want to say too that we're always on this journey of unlearning. I'm learning to unlearn, to relearn. I certainly don't position myself as an expert, but I certainly bring these experiences in my life as we continue to learn through this lifelong journey. So that's a little bit of the experience that I had within the arts, is providing an opportunity when I was an art teacher for Indigenous students to see themselves, because I did bring Indigenous artists and artwork into the classroom. It was an opportunity to learn from Indigenous peoples and Indigenous arts instead of learning about, and also an opportunity to reverse the gaze and to work with students within that capacity. So I was an art teacher and also a music teacher for quite some time before I landed at the Urban Indigenous Education Center.
That's an incredible journey, Tanya. Miigwech for sharing. I love what you said there about reversing the gaze. And I love that. I love that we get the opportunity to do that through our artwork, and how important and vital it is that we have educators like yourselves, Duke and Tanya, and many others, who are allowing space for Indigenous aesthetics, Indigenous stories, Indigenous ways of producing art, materiality, all of those things that are different and that haven't had space in mainstream art sectors until really my generation, I think, and still there's a long way to go. There's a long way to go. Tanya, you said you were going to mention a quote by Louis Riel, and I know many of us are familiar with this quote, but I would love you to go back to that, because I really am interested in hearing from each of you about maybe briefly what you think the role of artists are to their communities or to the city in Toronto, to Toronto.
So the quotation that I was referring to was, my people will sleep for 100 years, but when they awake, it will be the artists who give them back their spirit. Mm-hmm. And that was said in 1885, shortly before his execution.
Mm. Yes, I love that quote. Duke, what do you think that the role of artists are in their own communities, or perhaps to this particular city, to Toronto?
Well, what is developed is that Indigenous art, starting back in '62 with Norval Morsel, who became a good friend of mine, came on the scene, and he introduced his paintings that were on Birch Bark, and Jack Pollock, a gallery owner, you can say he discovered Norval for the dominant culture's benefit. But the art that had been created by people like Norval was for a different purpose than commodifying and selling in galleries. The art was actually produced as a method of healing through art, and the birch bark pieces that Norval was delivering to members of his community were, in fact, visual prescriptions for the purpose of healing. It was never meant to be shown in a gallery, or for that matter to be commodified. The Indigenous art was coming from a completely different place. It was coming from a place of healers, vision healers, who use these images to connect to the relationship that the traditional Indigenous people had with the earth, and find places of medicine and healing. That was what the art was about. However, the churches considered them to be descriptions that were generated by the devil in their words. They said it was witchcraft, devil images, and suppressed it, and got people frightened of these images in the Indigenous community. Although the people who were traditional and had memory of the origins of these healing pieces kept them hidden and kept them as prescriptions for healing. And then all of a sudden, Norval came on the scene, and he made an impact on the art world that was, for its time, caused people to look at Indigenous art in a completely different way. Up until the Norval, Indigenous art was considered to be folk art, decorative art. It didn't have any meaning beyond decoration, and primitive was often called. And it wasn't until Norvell's began to paint, that it impacted people in a completely different way, and actually made its way into the galleries of and homes of people who were art collectors. That followed with a number of Indigenous artists who saw that this was an opportunity to express through their traditional art practice. They could develop and earn a living, and soon the woodland style of art was hanging in every dentist and doctor's office and government office and building as a way that people had of saying, well, we appreciate the Indigenous art. And on the West Coast, of course, it just went ballistic in the sense of the incredible beauty of the art that was created out there, and so it became entered into the public domain, and people began to recognize that Indigenous people, along with the Inuit art that was being created in sanatoriums, with the carvings and so on, it just turned things around during the 70s and 80s. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of mythology associated with it, because the Inuit people did not carve animals until they were in the sanatoriums, and they were carving these animals, whales and bears, and memories of their home, and that wasn't something that they were doing traditionally, because nomadic people don't carry heavy stone carvings around with them when the real thing is on the landscape. So what does this all mean in terms of what has happened now? We have a plethora of Indigenous art that is being created. It's now has its own practice in the OCAD University under the Indigenous Art and Design program. There's sculpture, there's dance, there's music. The arts are flourishing. There's film, there's video. It's become penetrating into the collective consciousness of the Canadian public to a degree that never happened before. It has impacted, and now we can go through Toronto and we can see these incredible murals on painted by artists like Phil Cote, incredible, beautiful representations of a culture and a tradition that was missing and had been missing for so long. However, that does not give the depth of what our capacity for science and technology, the programs that we like to call like STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. We had a tradition of all of that functioning and operating in the Americas long before the settlers ever arrived, and a lot of our innovative thinking and a lot of our engineering techniques and science was just wholesale, was taken wholesale and by the dominant culture, and soon we were denied access to our own medicines. Meanwhile, the pharmaceuticals were taking our medicine practice and refining them and putting them into tablets and then selling them back to us. So there's good things about our access and the demonstration that we've demonstrated very clearly that we are equal, if not superior, to any culture that has arrived here from other parts of the world. And so the art is helping to bridge a gap so that people say, well, there is more to Indigenous people than just wigwams and moccasins. As wonderful and beautiful as those designs are, there's so much more. So that's my short answer.
Me Wedge Duke. And I guess I want to hit a little bit about what you're talking about with Norval Morrisseau and then lead into a question about education. And I'll come back and interweave this art theme again. But Norval lived up in Temagami, where my grandfather lived. And some of the stories that I've heard through the art world and also through the community there. And my friend George Walker, who's a printmaker and a teacher at OCAD, used to live with Norval and said Norval talked about a process of almost astral projection, if you will, when he would paint his art. And he'd be so inspired by these paintings, by these visions that he'd have, that he would paint over some of his other work. And it would drive his art dealer crazy because for Norval, it was a process of creating, and it was channeling a spirit. It was channeling something, a story that needed to be told that was coming through him and onto the canvas. And I think about that process of art making and also just the understanding of the role and the purpose of art to one's community, how different that is from perhaps what I'll term a more mainstream idea of art. And it's hard to just sum up art for everybody in one particular way. So I don't mean to polarize people with my language here. But it is interesting, that process. And I think about that in terms of education as well. And I know each of you have a lot of experience within the mainstream education system of trying to include Indigenous ways of knowing and being and doing, and how difficult that can be. I want to kind of start with a quote, and Tanya tells me, Duke, you have some interesting feedback about this particular quote, and of course, it's a famous quote that's been made by former Senator Maurice Sinclair, who, of course, was the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and I certainly heard it a lot in the education field. And he said, "Education got us into this mess, and education will get us out of this mess." And I have a lot of trust in that statement, but Duke, I feel like you might have an important perspective to offer about Sinclair's statement.
Well, first of all, we have to start with the fact that the residential school system, first of all, they weren't schools. They didn't teach anything on education whatsoever. They never were schools. And the residents would be like calling a prison a hotel. Residential schools, they were never residential and they were never schools. So we cannot say that education got us into this situation. Education will get us out. The truth is that racism, ignorance, and a policy of cultural genocide by the government and practiced by the churches is what got us into this mess. And education definitely will get us out when it's combined with something called truth. Debuin in our culture, as we say, truth will, and the education, the dissemination of that truth, that no one was, or that everyone was denied, including our people, for 140 years. So no, I don't agree with the statement education got us in and education get us out. Ignorance and racism, policy of cultural genocide got us into this mess. And a new type of education, not one based upon Western industrialized education created by colonial rich democracies to oppress people, but rather an education from the greatest platform of education that exists in our universe, and it's called Mother Earth.
Miigwech, I really applaud you for saying that, Duke. I don't think anybody else has articulated it in that way. And I just think that that's an incredibly insightful perspective. It was not education. It was not education whatsoever. Tanya, do you have any thoughts you'd like to add to that, or to Marie Sinclair's?
Yeah, certainly. I'd like to say that it was genocide got us into this mess, and Indigenous knowledges will be what will lead us forward when we think about seven generation thinking. That the earth does not belong to us; we belong to the earth, and it's our responsibility to care for it for future generations. And so, when I'm thinking about Indigenous knowledges within education, or I think about my own journey in coming into ways of knowing and being as an Indigenous woman. I've been inspired by what Elder Willie Ermine too has spoken of in terms of the concept of Mama Tawasawin as the spiritual attunement. He says it's a divine inspiration experienced through acts of creative expression that Duke was speaking to with regard to Norval Morisso's process, and that you were speaking to as well, Carrie. And he goes on to say that with these acts of creative expression, only through subjectivity may we continue to gain authentic insights into truth. And speaking to Debuewin, as Duke was speaking to, we need to experience the life force from which creativity flows. And through this, when you're speaking of the responsibility, I take this responsibility very seriously with regard to education and Indigenous art and artists. I like to say that Indigenous artists have been creating contemporary art since time immemorial, and there isn't this concept of traditional and contemporary. This binary doesn't exist, because art in itself is not this separate thing that sits outside of us. It sits within us, and it's a way of knowing and being and doing. And in education and with artists, in the way that I see it and what I've come to know, is that through this, we're supporting the reclaiming and the revitalization of our ways of knowing and being. And then there's this resurgence of Indigenous ways of knowing and being that will carry us in a good way from today and on, from 7 generations back into the future. And this is about storytelling and opportunities for me in acknowledging identity and identities through Indigenous self-representation. And from my own experience, reinventing what it means to be, or revisioning what it means through this radical resurgence, what it means to be an Indigenous person today and in the future. So it's a restoration of memory or rememory. And I see this work as being taken up in a sense that it's the intention of giving back to the community, to the ancestors, and creating new possibilities through creativity and innovation. We're telling our truths. Our Dubwaywen will provide opportunities for well-being and social change. And going back to what Duke was saying again as well, healing. It's a story of celebration. It's a story of survival. And it's beyond survival. It's who we are and how we're thriving as artists. And so it's really inspirational to see Indigenous artists working in so many different mediums and working in a very interdisciplinary manner as well. The way that arts are taught in school are very much siloed. You know, you have your art, you have your music, you have your dance, and there are opportunities, of course, within every of those areas to work in a very interdisciplinary way. But Indigenous ways of knowing and being, from what I understand them to be right now, it's not that these things are separate. They're all together. It's how we interact in the world through what Willie Ermine is imparting, in which I'm learning and trying to understand. And you had asked earlier on about some of the work that I was doing. So just with regard to digital storytelling and the Teaching Rock story that we did, that was a project actually that came out of the Urban Masters in Education that Dr. Susan Diane started through York University, that I had the opportunity to be a part of. And we engaged in using Indigenous methodologies through digital storytelling to work on this particular project. And really, with a group of people that we were working with, we started on the land. We started with the petroglyphs. And we had the opportunity to learn from Elder Doug Williams, and then learn from those teachings, and then think intentionally about what does it mean to be Indigenous today, and what does it mean to be an urban Indigenous person? Because although I did grow up during those very formative years on the land, we're always on the land, I have strong roots and connections. And we do need to speak about urban indigeneity and what that means, because I do think of myself as an urban Indigenous person, because I've lived most of my life here in Toronto. And so it's working within community. And so I see it as a responsibility that as Indigenous artists, it's about that storytelling. And people are coming from so many different perspectives, including the stories told to us by others about who we are, and speaking back to that and creating our own stories as Indigenous peoples in constructing. I spoke to reversing the gaze, by constructing counter-hegemonic meaning about who we are from our own truths. So for me, that's how I see it. And with education, it's an opportunity, to do that. And as I said, my schooling, I didn't see myself represented, and now all students, Indigenous or not, have opportunities to learn the truth.
Mm-hmm. Miigwech, for sharing all of that. I'm really thankful for you to introduce me to Willie Ermine's concept of Mama Tawasawin. And, I think we could talk for a very long time, and I would like to continue to talk for a much longer time than we actually have. But we do have about 5 or so minutes left just with our conversation right now before I open it up to the Q&A. And I do want to give each of you a time to ask a question of each other. I see a couple of people have put questions in the Q&A already. And I do want to remind everybody who's listening and watching right now to feel free to click that Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and to type in a question that, and I'll try and get to everybody's question, but if we don't have enough time, we will, I apologize in advance for that. You'll just have to go down to Wigwam Chichimung and find Duke and ask the question directly to him. But I love this discussion about what Indigenous education looks like, and you gave me a lot of gems out of that conversation, Tanya. And Duke, when you and I spoke on the phone last month, you said this great thing, and I'm paraphrasing you a little bit. You said many great things, but you said, from a mainstream perspective, education is about strategically assembling information to achieve a goal. It's not about truth, it's about power. How does that differ from an Indigenous education?
Well, if we define education as the capacity to assemble information strategically to accomplish a goal, if we define it that way, then we are more than capable of manifesting any goal that we choose to imagine. And it's proven over and over and over again. So the difference between Indigenous capacity to do exactly the same thing, because we have the same ability to assemble information to accomplish a goal. But the last question that an Indigenous educator asks before pursuing the goal is the question, is it wise? Is the goal wise? And wisdom is not taught in any school, in any university. You can't go any place to find wisdom except the earth itself, because the earth has sequestered within its within its creation from however that came about, all the wisdom necessary. Obviously, because we are a result of that wisdom. Now whether creating human beings was a wise decision by nature is yet to be answered. However, what I'm getting at here is that we take what we call the ancestor teachings, and we say, all right, within the framework of the ancestor teachings, which is wisdom, courage, respect, honesty, truth, humility, and love, do all of these elements have a place in the decision that you're about to take, and will in framing with taking those characteristics into consideration, how will it affect 7 generations into the future? As far as we can tell, in terms of our experience, if it's going to have a positive effect upon the future, then it's okay to pursue. But if we see that the decisions that are going to be taken are going to have a negative effect on the future, then we would not not go in that direction. However, that is not how the dominant culture makes decisions. They make decisions around 5-year plans. Well, for Indigenous people, it would our planning of only 5 years just is not, it doesn't make sense. It has to be generational, not just 5 years at a time. So the Indigenous way of assembling information and putting it to good use is to make sure that we have a sustainable birthing place for our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren into infinity. And that is not the way of the dominant culture. Now, remember that I want to make this very clear to the audience. Everyone is Indigenous because indigeneity simply means a spontaneous relationship to a particular geography where you are born. That is what it means to be human. In North America, we didn't have any concept of race because there was only one race. It was called the human race. And that's still the truth, except that it's that these cultural, social constructions of dividing the human race into black race, white race, yellow race, these are constructions that have no basis in truth. So in our world, that kind of an idea would never be, wouldn't be acceptable. We would be dealing with one another as we belong to one human race, and it isn't divided. There aren't a dozen or a half a dozen or 6 or 4 or 5 races. There's one race. So you begin there. Now, when the people migrate and come as immigrants to Canada, Canada has a wonderful program of offering everyone that arrives a lemon. And in that lemon, they say, here's a lemon. Now go out and make lemonade, build a business, make a world for yourself. But the lemons that are offered Indigenous people weren't fruit. They were either photographs of a lemon or a plastic lemon. There was no way that you could, that what we were offered or given or obtained was capable of doing what an immigrant was the opportunities that were there. And then we get a response from the general population. Well, my father came with $4 in their pocket, and now he owns a business. What happens to Indigenous people? How come you couldn't do what my grandfather did when he moved into this country? How come every Indigenous person isn't wealthy? We were the occupiers, and we were the caretakers and stewards of a continent. How is it that every Indigenous people isn't a multimillionaire? How is it that our people have been denied any power or authority, or because we weren't invited in? We weren't allowed. Our ancestors were denied food on the reserves. They were moved into places they couldn't make a living. They weren't even allowed to sell their own produce in the marketplace. The children were taken away, put into residential schools, abused, and so on. Then our young men went and fought against fascism during the First and Second World Wars to protect the Canadian population, to help protect against fascism, while they're the very children of those warriors who were fighting in the trenches in Europe. Their children were fighting fascism in in the residential schools and the institutions. And when those soldiers came back, they were denied their status, they were denied their access to their communities, they were denied access to their children, and the government then created a whole other program called the foster care program, which is built on the idea that you can commodify children, and if you can get a house together with 4 or 5 bedrooms, you can actually acquire foster children, and the government will you'll be able to make a living fostering children with none of the family supports, the community supports, none of those things. So when I'm confronted with the usual pushback, which is, well, we admire your art. We like to wear your moccasins. Your parkas are great. It's fun to go snowshoeing. We even play your traditional game of hockey, but we don't want to. We don't understand why you're all not happily upper middle class like we are, because our grandfathers came into town with only $4 in their pocket.
Well, this is the role of education, isn't it, Duke?
Yes.
And this is what's been missing in our education system for so long. And I mean, I think all of us grew up in mainstream who grew up in mainstream systems, and I would argue still to this day, we really know almost nothing about the context in which Indigenous people have lived for the past 150 plus years. That those were some of the worst years that we've existed in some ways, and so I do want to give time. There are hundreds of people here tonight joining us, and there are many questions that have come up in the Q&A section. I did want to ask one final question of Tanya, because you and I talked about what is needed in education, and I hope you don't mind me sharing. Your response was Indigenous educators and Indigenous people at all levels of academia. And there's so many barriers to getting them in those places, and structural systemic barriers that exist because we're working within a pre-existing system that doesn't look at Indigenous ways or prioritize that. And there's so many layers to that. But Tanya, what does Indigenous sovereignty have to do with education?
Indigenous sovereignty with education means basically that Indigenous people need to be at the table, at the highest tables. Indigenous people inviting people to our table to basically say that any decisions that impact our community, we are part of those decisions, we're leading those decisions. So that's the sovereignty and self-determination, and how that unfolds is different and challenging. And that's why, we refer to the work of Dr. Susan Diane in Decolonizing Our Schools, a report that she did in 2010, specifically about Indigenous education in the Toronto District School Board. At that time, it was called Aboriginal Education, and the recommendations thereof. So it goes beyond, having Indigenous people in systems of public schooling. It's really about collaboratively working as well to create the conditions for the possibility of transformation that can lead to better outcomes, and to build capacity and knowledge. Then it's the knowledge gap that you're speaking to, because while Indigenous children were being taken from their homes, forcibly removed, and placed in these places that are not called school, the general population was also being denied the truth. However, everybody kind of knew what was going on. People knew what was going on. And so with all respect to the unmarked graves that are coming into the mainstream sort of public consciousness, Indigenous people have known this all along. And so it's really that it's about political will, and it's about the commitment to learning to unlearn to relearn. It's the commitment to learning from Indigenous peoples instead of about, so the relationship is really integral, and building those relationships based on reciprocity. So relationships based on reciprocity, responsibility, respect, all of these things that are very much have been in the research for a long time. And it's good to see that there's been some improvement, but we've got a very, very long way to go. Because you can hang Indigenous art on a wall, or you can hire an Indigenous person, but are you really decolonizing an institution? So it goes much deeper than that. And it needs to move beyond apathy, because apathy is the greatest barrier.
Miigwech, Tanya. I want to turn it over. I've been reading the questions that are coming in, and if people have other questions, they can certainly add them, but we do have quite a number to get through, and only about 15 or 20 minutes at the most to go through them. So I would like to start with Sarah's comment and question. And Sarah, thank you for this. It says, thank you for the brilliant talk. What role would you say Indigenous languages play in radical resurgence or the way forward? Miigwech. What role do languages play in radical resurgence?
Well, there's an incredible place for Indigenous languages to move forward in terms of the languages as we as they're based on a verb frame. Let me see where I should start with this. Latin languages are binary. They have built-in either or in them. There is always an opposite to every noun. And in a binary world, and what the computer systems are based on binary language, which is 0-1, and all of our computing is based on that binary language. And so a language like English is very easy to communicate and build programming in a binary system, and can build in all kinds of binary biases in the system. But now we have quantum computing. Quantum computing is no longer 0-1. The new quantum computing is I don't know how to describe the difference is that there is no 0-1 in quantum computing. 0 and 1 can be any number of iterations of zeros and ones that is beyond our capacity to describe or communicate with, unless we are speaking a non-binary language. And those non-binary languages happen to be in the Americas here, Indigenous languages. Indigenous languages are more capable of communicating a technology and capacity with the modern Generation 5 quantum computing, which is taking over all our platforms of information. So now with when we look at what were called pictographs of the past, we were beginning to find out that they weren't pictographs, they were emojis. And those emojis actually contained an immense amount of information, along with wampum text through wampum belts and so on, along with language. You had this combination, and it was based upon a verb, constant flowing, changing capacity that binary languages don't really have. So what is the future of Indigenous languages? The Indigenous languages are going to frame the communication systems of the future, is my thought on that one.
Tanya, do you have anything to add in terms of Indigenous languages and their role in radical resurgence or Indigenous education, which I believe is part of that radical resurgence?
Yeah, I'd like to speak a little bit further to this concept of sovereignty. We've talked about it quite a bit. It's having power and authority over, the decisions that impact in Indigenous peoples and systems of public schooling. So that looks, very, very different in different ways. But really, it's about that power, authority, and autonomy. There's the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's calls to action that upholds the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as that framework for reconciliation. And that speaks very much to sovereignty and self-determination. With regard to Indigenous languages and language revitalization, I myself am recuperating the language, and in my experiences with that, it's the worldview. It's a window to the worldview. It really. I like to say that there's three things, and they're all interconnected, that Indigenous education is. It's the connection to the land, Indigenous land-based education. It's that connection to the languages that emerge from the land. It's that connection to ancestors. And it's that connection to cultures and traditions and ceremony. And those are braided together. That's Indigenous education. And, with the commitment to particular actions within the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there's 62 and 63, which is about creating professional learning and creating curriculum resources. That's one aspect of the journey. And like I said, we have a long way to go. Indigenous languages is the view. It holds the worldview, the paradigm, the epistemology. It holds that understanding in the language. And so when I was studying the language, and you have to keep it up and continually to speak it, and I was learning Neowak Cree, I was really in awe by the understanding of relationship in so many different ways that the language holds. So language is integral. It really is. And we're heading into the decade of Indigenous language revitalization, I believe international. And, there's all different kinds of languages. I grew up with a little bit of Michif, a little bit of Cree. We heard that in the household, and French and English. So that's what I heard, in my Kokum's home. So it is critical, and we need to do all that we can do to invest in Indigenous language revitalization.
Chimigwech. A lot to take in there. I love those 3 points that you mentioned about land, language, and connecting to our ancestors as a framework for Indigenous education. There are so many other questions here, and we're running out of time, and I'm going to close it off with one final question, and then I'll hand it over to Nadine at MyZM to do our closing tonight. But one of the things we did want to kind of take away from this session is some concrete either materials or ideas that educators can use, for example, in their own classrooms or in their own institutions. Perhaps it's an idea, perhaps it's a resource or a concept you'd like to leave people with. And Deb shares this question, do you have any recommended resources for teachers? So maybe we could start with Duke, and then I'll go to Tanya.
Well, I think of Chelsea Vowell's book that is
Indigenous Rights.
Indigenous Rights.
Yeah.
Is a good place to start, simply because she answers most of the questions that come up on a regular basis in a good way, and she has many sources and resources that she points people to once they've asked the basic question. So that's one. There's once you get past that and the 21 things that everyone should know about the Indian Act, books like that give a basic knowledge, and then you can move on into the recommendations that Tanya is going to share with us, because she's in the trenches out there in the field, working every day so hard and to bring Indigenous knowledge into the classrooms of the Toronto District School Board. So I'll turn it over to Tanya.
Yes, Indigenous rights for sure. And I'm just looking around here at all the different resources. There's many of them, many. Indigenous artists, Indigenous authors. The work of Duke Redbird is poetry. Depending resources for what? I'm wondering what that question is specifically. But certainly I'm just looking around here, what I have on my desk. There's Decolonizing Education, and that's by Marie Batiste. I would recommend that, as well as 21 Things You Need to Know about the Indian Act. Like, I'm just looking around here. I got Decolonizing Trauma Work. There's a theme here with decolonizing. I like to talk about undecolonizing too, and centering the Indigenous work by authors. And here's this one as well that I know you worked on, Carrie, and you mentioned, which is Indigenous Toronto. So I'm just pulling a few things around me because I'm not really sure what was being asked with regard to resources. Is it resources to be used in the classroom, or resources to learn more? For example, here's another one, Unsettling Canada. This is the one that Duke was mentioning. 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act. Or it's by Gerald Weisner, Survivance. There's lots. There's many. Here's a great one too. Braiding legal orders. So it really depends on what's being asked. If you're an educator and you're teaching in elementary.
Oh, Tanya's screen is frozen there for a second. We'll see if she comes back to us. But I think we should all go over to Tanya's house.
Again, for goodminds.me.
Sorry, Tanya, you just froze for a minute there. Sorry about that. I'm just talking about going over and raiding your library.
Can you hear me now?
We can, yeah.
Hello? Okay,
Hi.
I'll finish with that. I'll wrap that up because I'm cognizant of the time. It's 8:36.
Great.
And it's just been a wonderful honor to be here. And to be here with Duke. Duke's a library.
I know, you both are, and such wonderful resources to have in this particular city. And I just want to, just because we've been talking about the arts, there's so many incredible arts organizations and artists who are in this city doing incredible work, very underpaid, underappreciated work. So reach out to those organizations, go to the Imaginative Film and Media Arts Festival. They do screenings online as well. That happens every October. Save your money from TIFF, go to Imaginative, give them all your money. Go to TIFF too, I'm just kidding. But there are incredible resources out there. Danis Goulet's new film, Night Raider, is premiering at TIFF very soon. There are artists featured at the Art Gallery of Ontario that maybe you've never heard about. There's Anpava, there's Native Women in the Arts, nwia.ca, Red Sky Performance. There's so many that I can't even list. And please use this community in your classroom, and pay people too, pay artists as well. But Duke and Tanya, absolutely an honor to, I wish we had another hour. That is a very selfish thing of me to say, because I just really wanted to hear even more. And I had 10 other questions, and there's so many other questions in the Q&A that we didn't have time to get to. And I want to thank everybody for joining us and for your really thoughtful, wonderful questions. And I apologize for not getting to those for those of you who were hoping to have them answered. But Duke, Chimigwech, Tanya, Chimigwech, and Bamapi until later. And Nadine, I'll turn this over to you now and say Miigwech also to the incredible museum staff who are just doing such great work and are so wonderful to work with.
So much, Carrie. I'll be very quick, but I can't end this program without first expressing our enormous gratitude to our speakers this evening, Elder Duke Redbird and Tanya Senk, for sharing your stories, your experiences, and your teachings. I think I can very safely say that I speak for all of us here this evening when I say that it's really been such a privilege to be able to listen to and learn from you both. So thank you so much. Thank you to our moderator, Carrie Potts, for helping to hold and guide this very important conversation. Thank you to our project partners for Wigwam Chichamong, Duke Redbird, Nancy Wolf. Huge shout out to Nancy Wolf, who facilitates so much of everything we do with Wigwam Chichamong, and Ontario Place. Special thanks to Andrew Balfour for sharing his musical composition, Vision Chant, sung by the Canadian Chamber Choir, which was the music you heard at the beginning of the program. Thank you to our live captioner, and thank you to you all for joining us this evening. Please join us for our second In Conversation program with Elder Redbird and composer Andrew Balfour on September 22nd at 7 p.m. Please visit Wigwam Chichamong either at Ontario Place, by phone, or on our website. And you can go to museumoftoronto.com or sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on everything we're doing here. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you again.